You are watching In Conversation This Week with Micheál O'Hurley.
I have received apologies from Senator Neil O'Donnell and I offer the apologies of the Dáil members of the committee for a somewhat late start due to a vote in the plenary house. I welcome the team from the Ukraine Embassy to Ireland, Excellency Ms. Larysa Gerasko, Ambassador of Ukraine to Ireland. You're very welcome. We thank you for taking time to meet our committee at this time of heightened tension and challenge. I welcome members of the committee, and I also point out to members and to our guests that some of our members are joining us remotely from their offices due to the ongoing COVID restrictions. So I welcome Deputy Stanton, I welcome Deputy Cowan, I welcome Senator Wilson, and perhaps even others whose faces I just can't see at the moment, along with Deputy Brady, Senator Crockwell, Deputy Berry, Senator Joe O'Reilly, with us in the chamber. Ambassador, you join us at a time of heightened tension in Eastern Europe. And our meeting this afternoon provides us with an opportunity, and indeed it provides the Irish people with the same opportunity to hear directly from the representative team and from you, Ambassador, as Ambassador of Ukraine in Ireland. We look forward to receiving an update from you on the current situation regarding the build-up of troops on the Russian border with Ukraine, the situation in Kiev and beyond, and also the situation in Crimea and Donbass. We also welcome Ms. Shalapot, who is indeed no stranger to our work and our committee, and also Mr. Dimitru Shedrin, who is First Secretary at the Embassy. The format of the meeting, Ambassador, is that we will hear your opening statement, followed by a discussion with questions and answers by members of the committee. Again, I ask members to be concise in their questions to allow all members the opportunity to participate. We may indeed have a second round or second opportunity, should members so desire. I remind witnesses of the long-standing parliamentary practice that we shouldn't criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make any person or entity in any way identifiable, or indeed otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of that person or entity. Therefore, if any statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. And of course, it's imperative that any such direction be complied with. For witnesses attending remotely outside the Leinster House campus, there are some limitations to parliamentary privilege and as such mightn't benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as a witness physically present in the room does. I remind members also of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they shouldn't comment on, criticise or make charges against any person outside the House or an official, either by name or in any way as to make that person or entity identifiable. I remind members that they are only allowed to participate in this meeting if they are physically located on the Leinster House complex. So, Ambassador, I now call upon you to make your opening statement, and again I want to thank you and your team for meeting with our committee this afternoon. Ambassador Gerasko, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for inviting me. Dear Chair, dear members of the Oireachtas, I am honoured to be here today for the first time and address the distinguished members of the Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defence on the threats that the Russian Federation poses to Ukraine and the Europe in its entirety. Before I turn to my remarks, let me, on behalf of the government of Ukraine, extend the words of appreciation for Ireland's support that we are receiving in this unprecedentedly challenging time for my country. Ireland has always been a reliable partner of Ukraine, both in bilateral and in international fora. We successfully cooperate on a number of UN resolutions, including those on human rights in Crimea, militarization of peninsula, and the security situation in the Black and Azov Seas. We are also grateful to Ireland for its advocacy efforts in the UN Security Council. The strong statements delivered by the Irish diplomacy within this border for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of Ukraine are of utmost importance for us. Ireland's non-recognition policy of the illegal occupation of Crimea, that is also included into the program for government, Our Shared Future, is yet another demonstration on its unwavering stance in this respect. On the 23rd of August last year, two major events took place in Kiev. The first one was the Crimean Platform Summit attended by all the EU member states, including Ireland, represented by Minister Simon Coveney. The summit is an important first step toward the deoccupation of Crimea, aimed at returning the peninsula to the area of the rule of law and respect for human rights under the sovereignty of Ukraine. Chair, I avail myself of this opportunity to submit the appeal of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on strengthening international cooperation within the framework of the Crimean platform in the parliamentary dimension. I would appreciate if you share the appeal with the members of the committee. We look forward to your wider engagement in developing the Crimean platform activities. The second milestone event was the opening the Embassy of Ireland to Ukraine that has provided new opportunities for strengthening bilateral ties. Dear members of the Oireachtas, it's my duty and need to fully update you on what is going on in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine in Crimea and Donbass, as well as along the border of Ukraine, where the Russian Federation continues its military buildup. For the 8th consecutive year, Ukraine has been countering external armed aggression from its neighbor. About 7% of the territory of Ukraine remains under foreign occupation in blatant violation of the UN Charter and international law. Over 14,000 people killed, more than 30,000 wounded, and over 1.5 million of internally displaced persons. These are the consequences of this aggression, which Russia sells to the world as so-called internal conflict in Ukraine. We also keep the memory of 298 passengers of MH17 flights, including one Irish national, killed as a result of the terrorist attack in 2014, when the plane was shot down by Russian servicemen using Buk missile system. Unfortunately, the facts indicate that Russia is intending to continue its odious policy of hatred. According to the latest estimation, the Russian contingent of armed forces is totaling nowadays about 119,000 troops amassed around Ukraine's border and in Crimea. Ukraine, in accordance with the Vienna document on confidence and security building measures, requested the detailed explanation on the objectives of the military activity conducted in close proximity to the state border of Ukraine and in temporarily occupied Crimea. However, due to Russia's failure to explain its action and military movements in a transparent manner, on 13 of February, Ukraine requested a meeting with Russia and all participating states within 48 hours to discuss its reinforcement and redeployment along our border and in Crimea. As Foreign Minister Kuleba said, and I quote, "If Russia is serious when it talks about the indivisibility of security of the OSCE space, it must fulfill its commitment to military transparency in order to de-escalate tensions and enhance security for all." End of quote. We are worried by coincidence in time and place of the above-mentioned build-up of Russian forces at the Ukrainian border with joint Russian-Belarusian operation drills called Allied Resolve 2021 in the territory of Belarus, and the massive Black Sea drills, which assemble almost a third of all acting warship on the Russian Navy, including numerous landing crafts. Overall, the Russian Defense Ministry announced the conduct of the Navy military exercises simultaneously in the Mediterranean North and Okhotsk Seas, in the Pacific as well as in the Atlantic, cyber-rattling and threatening even countries with traditionally military neutrality. Dear members of the committee, another alarming trend is a significant reinforcement of combat capabilities of the Russian occupation force in Donbass. Currently, this formation consists of up to 35,000 personnel, including 3,000 servicemen of the Russian armed forces on command posts and in other critical combat positions. Russia's decision not to extend the mandate of the OSCE border observer missions at the Russian checkpoint Ghukovo and Donetsk shows that Moscow's main interest inheres in the use of its sole control over both sides of the 409-kilometer segment of the state border between Russia and Ukraine in order to unimpededly keep supplying weapons, military equipment, ammunition, regular troops and mercenaries to the temporarily occupied part of Donetsk and Lugansk region. Despite the fact that last December, the trilateral contact group reached another understanding on resuming the ceasefire regime, shooting, shelling, sniper fire on Ukrainian position, and systematic use of attack UAVs against Ukrainian troops have not ceased. Meanwhile, freedom of movement of the OSCE special monitoring missions continues to be restricted in the non-government controlled territories of Ukraine. These realities are recorded in the numerous reports of the mission and are made publicly available on the mission's website. We consider utterly unacceptable any withdrawal of SMM personnel by seconding states at this critical moment, since Moscow might use it as a ground for shutting the SMM down. Thus, I urge Ireland to keep its mission members that are already on the ground and even to look into the possibility to strengthen the SMM by increasing the number of the monitors. To our deep sorrow, since December last year, 6 servicemen have already been killed in action and more than 21 servicemen have been wounded. Most recently, on the 25th of January, the illegal armed formation of the Russian Federation once again attacked the position of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of Peshivik, Donetsk region, using an UAV. The OG-17 fragmentation grenades dropped from that UAV resulted in severe injuries to 2 Ukrainian servicemen, And then on the 2nd of February, the same firing was recorded in the entry-exit checkpoint near Hnutove, Donetsk region, which serve as a humanitarian corridor. Unfortunately, the number of ceasefire violations committed by illegal military formation continues to increase. The latter were reported by OSCE SMM just yesterday. No surprise then that Russia refuses to take meaningful steps to launch new entry-exit checkpoints, although Ukraine has made all the preparation for the opening of Zolote and Shastia checkpoints in line with the decision of Normandy 4 leaders reached in Paris on 9th of December 2019. The prospects of a mutual release of the conflict-related detainees has also come to a halt, despite the previous agreement on this matter and numerous requests from Ukraine, as well as lists of the illegally detained persons for the exchange submitted by our delegation in the TCG to the Russian side. All this is accompanied by Russia's stubborn denial of being a party to the armed conflict, attempts to impose a so-called direct dialogue with its puppet occupation administration, and refusal to engage in substantive discussion to implement a peaceful solution to the conflict. This morning, the Russian parliament appealed to President Putin to recognize an independence of temporarily occupied territories in the Donetsk and Lugansk region. If the Kremlin adopts such a decision, then Russia will de facto and de jure withdraw from the Minsk agreement with all its repercussions. We have already warned our partners about it. I call on the House of the Oireachtas to issue a motion condemning the above-mentioned appeal by the Russia's State Duma. Dear members of the committee, Russian aggression has not only the military but also economic and financial dimensions. Russia is investing enormous efforts to undermine economic and financial stability in Ukraine. Another proof of this is Russia's decision to hold military drills in the Black Sea region, while in parallel disabling the international navigation and fisheries in the Black and Azov Sea and Kerch Strait. Such activities also blocked access by merchant vessels to and from the Ukrainian ports. We have already initiated contacts with our partners, including those in the Black Sea region, in order to ensure that Russia's aggressive action, that are part of its hybrid warfare against Ukraine, receive an appropriate international assessment and response. We also remain in close contacts with the partners to explore new ways of additional support to ensure economic and financial stability in Ukraine. It is obvious that Russia's latest actions are aimed not against Ukraine only, but can be viewed in a much wider context. Russia uses gas, including Nord Stream 2 project, as a weapon to aggravate the energy crisis in Europe. It used migrants as a weapon to escalate tensions on Belarus border with Lithuania and Poland. On top of that, it increases cyber attacks in an attempt to destabilize the domestic situation in Ukraine and beyond. All those elements are part of Russia's plan to seriously destabilize Europe. In the worst-case scenario, Russia may try to undermine the entire post-Cold War security architecture in Europe and redraw borders in Europe by force again, as it already did in 2008 in Georgia and in 2014 by occupying Ukraine's Crimea and unleashing the war in Donbass. We also see a surge in Russian disinformation campaign, including false accusation of Ukraine plotting a military attack in Donbass. Let me reiterate, Ukraine does not plan any military offensive action in Donbass. We are committed to seek political and diplomatic solution to the Russian-Ukrainian armed conflict. Ukraine wants peace, security and stability, not only for itself, but also for the entire Europe. Together with additional military support from our Western partners, as well as with increased diplomatic and economic pressure on Russia, Ukraine is ready to defend itself. We are willing to keep diplomatic engagement with Russia on various tracks and on various formats. We are ready to resume Normandy 4 talks in all formats, including at the level of the leaders and foreign ministers. The political advisors meeting on 26th of January in Paris showed many differences in parties' position concerning the implementation of the Minsk agreement. At the same time, the consultation showed the potential for further dialogue on the settlement of the Russian-Ukrainian international armed conflict. Regretfully, during their most recent meeting on the 10th of February in Berlin, these differences persisted and no agreement was reached in any documents or statements. Yet the participants of that meeting expressed determination to meet again following a next session of the trilateral contact group. Dear members of the Oireachtas, to conclude my remark, I would like to stress again that Ukraine is committed to justice, peace and security, not only for itself, but for the whole of the Euro-Atlantic community. The future of the global security architecture is being decided in Ukraine, but the ability of the coalition of the democratic states to take on the current threats and challenges in Ukraine will have a direct impact on their own future. We count on continued pressure on Russia from our partners. We need a clear message that the Kremlin's plan will not work and continuation of aggression will be met with devastating response from the West and multiplied support of Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Ambassador, thank you for that opening address. What I propose to do now is to go to members of the committee. I will ask them for their observations and concise questions, and I might group 2 or 3 members together and then go back to yourself and your team, Ambassador, for your observations. Starting with Deputy Brady, followed by Senator Joe O'Reilly and Deputy Berry. Deputy Brady, thank you.
Look, Ambassador, you're very welcome before our committee this afternoon on what I can only imagine are very difficult times for all Ukrainian citizens, given the heightened and escalated military tensions facing your country. So just solidarity from the outset, and also just to express my total support for, I suppose, what I see as a very important resolution which is adopted by the UN General Assembly back in 2014, Resolution 68262, which clearly recognises the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So just to, again, send my full support for that resolution and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Now, this morning, things seem to have moved in what I think are a slightly positive direction in terms of the withdrawal or the calling back of Russian troops from the border regions back into barracks within Russia, and hopefully that is the start of a de-escalation something that I know I have called for and other members of this committee have called for when we had the Russian ambassador to Ireland, Ambassador Filatov, in before our committee, and unfortunately Ireland has been dragged into this as well because our waters have been used as a mechanism to sabre rattle tensions in the carrying out of naval manoeuvres by Russia close to Irish shores. I called on the Russian ambassador at that stage to de-escalate the tensions, and a sure way of showing, a commitment to this de-escalate would be not just to move that naval manoeuvre out of the EEZ, but to cancel it in its entirety. I've also called on Nato to de-escalate the tensions as well. So I've been, I suppose, very vocal on the need to de-escalate and use the diplomatic channels to ensure that we have a peaceful resolution to what is a very, very tense situation. So I welcome that, some moves have been made to de-escalate, and that needs now to be followed up by more actions to ensure that diplomacy wins out. And I know the commentary of the Russian foreign minister yesterday, Minister Lavrov, and he said we need to ensure that all diplomatic channels are followed. So I welcome that. So I think it is still a very, very challenging time. I know the EU have been very strong in terms of the repercussions for Russia if they do carry out military actions on Ukrainian territory, and I think that has been very loud and heard by the Russians, which I think is also adding to maybe some of the pullback in terms of the military build-up. But that needs to be followed by NATO as well. They need to de-escalate, in my view, the tensions from their side. And it's quite concerning. I'm following this very, very closely, and with huge concern. And when we hear daily reports that intelligence is coming in, that a Russian invasion is imminent, it's going to happen within the next 24 hours, the next 48 hours, I think the most level-headed people in the room are actually the Ukrainians, yourselves. And I know President Zelensky, only a couple of days ago when he was playing down some of the concerns and the warnings of a possible invasion within days. And I think he said he hasn't seen any convincing evidence that an invasion was imminent. So I maybe just asked that question in the first instance to see, I know he asked for some intelligence to be shared with Ukraine to show that an invasion was imminent. So just to see as to whether that intelligence it's reliable, whether an invasion was imminent or still is imminent, because certainly I know when they say in wars the truth is the first victim. I think there's an awful lot being said, and it's very hard to determine as to what is accurate and what isn't. So maybe just from a Ukrainian perspective, because I listened to, I think it was on the Claire Byrne show yesterday, where a reporter, Fergal Keane, who was in Kiev reporting live yesterday, and he was saying, look, things are normal in Kiev. People are carrying on their daily business, and it isn't what we're hearing from some of the Western media that, citizens are bunkered down, ready for an invasion. So just to get a first-hand as to what is actually happening on the ground in Ukraine. I just want to also ask you, Ambassador, now I know your colleague, the Ambassador to the UK, did clarify his remarks when he spoke about the possibility of Ukraine dropping its bid to join NATO. I know he did clarify, so maybe I might just ask you for your views in relation to that also. Just in relation to, I suppose, what you see as a way out of this, and I firmly believe that Ukraine are the only people who can decide your future and what you should or should not be allowed to sign up to. So I'll say that here categorically it should be the decision of Ukraine and Ukraine only. I just want to ask in relation to the Minsk agreement going back to 2014, and I know that had to be revisited again in 2015 with version 2 of that, when ceasefires couldn't be secured. So just to ask as to whether you still see that as a possible solution, a long-term solution to the situation in Ukraine, as to whether that agreement is still viable, and why you think it was never fully implemented, why ceasefires weren't fully secured, and why we still have an escalated tensions in the region, and whether you think that agreement is still something that is viable and a possible solution. And just the last commentary, Ambassador, you might just take this opportunity, because again, when I speak about the troop being the first victim in any conflict, there's reports coming out of mercenaries being used on all sides, in terms of Russia building up troops in Donbass, etc. But there's also counter narratives coming out about mercenaries being sent in to fight from the Ukrainian side, and I see some reports being circulated that there's some far-right extreme neo-Nazi groups that have been incorporated into the Ukrainian army to fight against the Russians. So maybe you might take an opportunity to answer that. And there's also reports coming out that Turkey are using some former or indeed members of ISIS that may have been fighting in places like Syria, Armenia, Azerbaijan in the most recent conflict there, and indeed in Libya, that they are now being utilised and put into the conflict zone. And just if that is the case, or if it isn't the case, maybe, Ambassador, you might be able to steer us right on that. But again, just to go back to my opening comments, solidarity to all Ukrainians in what is a very, very difficult time. Internationally, there's huge concern, and I think all Irish people would agree with me that when we're looking for a peaceful outcome here, and total solidarity again. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Brady. I'm not calling Senator Joe O'Reilly because Senator O'Reilly is due on duty in the chair in the Shannon at 4 p.m. Senator O'Reilly.
Thank you very much.
Followed by Deputy Berry.
No, thank you. And slightly before that, even, and I will have to read the responses maybe later, but I will be interested in them. I just want to say at the outset that we have a great appreciation and understanding of all the suffering of the Ukrainian people right through the 20th century and into the 21st. And there's no question about that. There's a great empathy towards that here in Ireland, and a great awareness of the huge suffering. And I must say, as you mentioned in your own remarks about our relationships on international fora, I have worked with your parliamentary colleagues on the Council of Europe. I had the privilege of visiting Kharkov on one occasion. It's a beautiful city, and sadly, in a conflict situation, it would be very much on the front line, and that's all very tragic. So, and I mean, it is the Irish position that we respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and that we were obviously against the occupation of Crimea and anything in Donbass as well. So, but just to put you some questions, and it's important that this get asked, and that you respond to this, Ambassador, because it's a question that a lot of people want to ask, but they're a bit too polite to ask you, would you accept that it's a reasonable fear for the Russians to be afraid of your full participation in Europe, say, and in NATO without some guarantees? And that that's a reasonable fear on the Russian side, and that while it's not reasonable that Russia should occupy your territory, would you accept that there is a onus on Ukraine in the middle of the diplomatic efforts now, and through we pray that there's a successful meeting with the German Chancellor and your President, or rather the Russian President today. But would you accept that while you have a right to national self-determination, you have a right to join any international bodies you want, the Russian people would want a sense of security, that NATO on their borders is quite a frightening position from their perspective too, and how do you respond to that? What would your response be to the Russian withdrawal of troops today? I mean, do you see that as a good portent, a good sign, or do you see that as some sort of a manoeuvring? But hopefully you will be fit to tell us that it's good news. We'd love to believe in Ireland here that it is, because there's nobody around this chamber but realises from very many reasons the horror of war, and we want a war avoided at all costs. So you might comment on that initiative today. Again, it's already been asked, but you might comment on the Minsk agreement and its working out, and why there's been a kind of a breakdown, and why there's been sort of breaches of the Minsk agreement and what can be done there. I'm interested, and I raised this with the Russian ambassador, on civil liberties and human rights in Belarus and the horrendous things that are happening in Belarus. And I understand that the fact that there used to be close relations, if I get it correctly, with Ukraine and Belarus, but that under Lukashenko now those relations are strained, and that presents a threat to Ukraine and a worry for Ukraine. So you might comment or explain to us the relationship with Belarus and its implications for Ukraine, and indeed what you would say about civil rights issues in Belarus. But that's not, unfortunately, that's not, and sadly, that's not your main agenda here today, and it's not your concern. And I suppose, just in summary, Chair, and thanks for you facilitating me, because I have to go back to do my job in the elsewhere, that in summary, we as a neutral, peace-loving people, and who, as you recognise our role in the UN and that, we want a peaceful outcome here. And I suppose if you were to get a sense of what the Irish people want, the Irish people would love to hear you say, Ambassador, today, that you will go any distance within reason to achieve peace, and that you are actively seeking peace, and that you're actively happy to to give the Russians a confidence that they are not threatened by an independent, strong Ukraine, that through diplomatic methods that could be achieved. And thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Deputy Berry.
Thank you.
Back to the Ambassador after Deputy Berry. Before reverting back to members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Ambassador, and to your team. You're most welcome here. I just have two very brief questions, really. The first one is in relation to the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. It's a very straightforward memorandum. It's only 1.5 pages long, and it's freely available on the internet. The memorandum was brought in when Ukraine got its independence, and when it agreed to hand over all its nuclear weapons to Russia in return for security guarantees. And just the security guarantees are quite explicit here. I'm just going to read them into the record, where Russia agreed to refrain from economic coercion and reaffirmed its obligation to refrain from the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine. So I guess my question to the Ambassador is this. First of all, has Ukraine handed over all its nuclear warheads? Thereby, has Ukraine handed over all its nuclear weapons to Russia, and thereby abiding by its side of the agreement? The second question is, what would the Ambassador's assessment be as to whether Russia has abided by its side of this agreement? They're my first two questions. And just the last one then is in relation to the percentage of the population in Ukraine that are interested in joining NATO and the European Union. So what is the percentage of the public in Ukraine approximately that are interested in joining NATO and the European Union? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Deputy Berry. I'm going to come back to you now, Ambassador, to deal with the question from Deputy Brady, from Senator O'Reilly, from Deputy Berry, and feel free to call in your colleagues as you deem appropriate. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you for your questions, very good questions and interesting. First, with regard statement of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, today's statement, I mean, regarding withdrawal the military troops from the border of Ukraine, we hope that Russia will fulfill its obligations under international law and will fulfill its promises. But we know how Russia acts, and we want, of course, to see this withdrawal. We want to in place, I mean. So if Russia starts de-escalate situation, we would be happy. As I've mentioned before, we are looking for peaceful resolution only. Of course, we are ready to defend our country. We are ready to defend our independence. But we don't want to have more casualties. We have already lost 14,000 people. And as I've mentioned, thousands of people were wounded. And it's very important to find peaceful resolution. And we keep all our diplomatic channels open for peaceful settlement. With regard to, I would like to underline that there is no NATO troops or the US troops or other countries' troops in Ukraine. Yes, we have to develop and to strengthen our capabilities of our army to defend ourselves, of course. And we are grateful to our partners for supplying defensive weapons. But there are no troops, any foreign military troops on the ground in the territory of Ukraine. Only we have such troops only on the temporarily occupied territories. Our ambassador to the UK, yesterday he clarified his interview, but I'd like to mention or to remind, might be, that before the 2014, before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, our country, Ukraine, was had neutral status by law. But after the invasion, we amended our constitution, and our Euro-Atlantic integration is enshrined in our constitution and supported by overwhelming majority of the population. Like 75% of the population now supports our joining to the EU and to NATO. We are looking for defensive alliance, which is NATO, defensive alliance, or any other defensive alliances to defend ourselves. Unfortunately, we had and we have now bad experience with our neighboring country. With regard to Minsk agreement, Minsk agreements are the key framework that allows Ukraine to achieve the final goal, to resume control over currently uncontrolled segment of our border with Russia and restore Ukraine's sovereignty over temporarily occupied Donbass. The problem is not about content of the Minsk agreement, but Moscow's lack of political will to implement them. Implementation of the security provisions of the Minsk agreements, withdrawal of the Russian armed forces and mercenaries, disarmament of the illegal separatist groups, and restoration of the border control are essential. How can you imagine, how can we organize the local elections in unsecure environment? It's impossible. This election, in this case, will not meet any OSCE requirements or other requirements of any international organizations. I didn't understand probably regarding Nazi groups. I don't know what do you mean Nazi groups. I never heard about any Nazi groups in Ukraine. We are a very peaceful and tolerant nation. And even I am sure that you will not find any I would say, facts in, for instance, in UN High Commission on Human Rights reports or like any other documents that we have Nazi groups or Ukraine violates human rights or something like that. Along our contact line with the occupied Donetsk and Lugansk region, we have only military troops of Ukraine Ukrainian force. And sorry? Yeah, it seems to me I answered on all your questions. Then on questions of Senator O'Reilly, to some extent probably I answered regarding Minsk agreement and etc. But with regard reasonable fear from Russia's side of expansion, NATO expansion. Russia demanded, as you know, demanded security guarantees of non-expansion NATO on Eastern Europe. But I want to ask, who threatened Russia? Russia has the second strongest army in the world. Russia has the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. Russia is one of the most powerful countries in the world. Who threatened them? Like Ukraine? Of course, no. It's one of Russia's narrative that Ukraine now threatens Russia and Ukraine is going to invade Russia, but it's nonsense, of course. Or Western Europe. With regard to our relation with Belarus, we had and hopefully we will have a very good and productive relationship with one of our neighboring countries. But as you know, Belarus, self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Lukashenko, actually spreads a threat to Ukraine to block gas supply, or even he promises that he will join to Russia. In case of invasion, further invasion. So I hope that people of Belarus will be free and will have president, will have elections, transparent elections, and it's Belarusian path. With regard to Budapest Memorandum, right, according to the Budapest Memorandum, Russia is one of the parties of this document, reaffirmed their commitments to Ukraine to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine, reaffirmed their obligation to refrain from the threats of use of force against territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, and that none of their weapons, I would like to underline, will never be used against Ukraine except in self-defense. So we give up by signing this memorandum, we gave up our nuclear arsenal, but in returning, we didn't receive anything from Russia. Russia has breached the Budapest Memorandum, the UN Charter, our bilateral agreement on friendship and cooperation, everything actually. We fulfilled our obligation under this memorandum, but not only Russia.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. I'm going to revert to Stanton and Senator Cockrell for a brief comment. David Stanton, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman, and could I welcome the Ambassador and our team here today, and thank you for your presentation. I just want to focus on one particular issue, and others were focused on. Obviously, none of us want war, and I just can't. It beggars belief to even the thought of a war or invasion of Ukraine. It's just very hard to contemplate it. But could I ask, at the moment, you said in your presentation, Ambassador, that there's also an economic and financial dimension to aggression. You might maybe let us know what is the situation at the moment in Ukraine from an economic point of view. How is your economy doing? What impact has COVID-19 had on Ukraine and on your people? I also know that there's a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement was signed in 2014 with the European Union. And could you describe your relationship with the European Union at the moment economically, and also your aspirations for EU membership? You might also comment on Nord Stream 2. What's your government's view of Nord Stream 2 and where that should go and the impact it will have or may have, what should happen to it? You also, I think, have 1.5 million refugees at the moment in your country. I think you have about 43 million people living in Ukraine. Could you talk about the refugees and where they've come from and how they're doing, how they're being treated? Because it's a debate we've had here as well for quite some time. And finally, one of the issues you do mention is the use of gas as a weapon. What's your own dependence on energy? How are you getting your own gas, your own energy at the moment, and how do you see that into the future? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Deputy Stanton. And Senator Crockwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Ambassador, you're welcome, and thank you for your presentation. Ambassador, how successful do you think sanctions against Russia would be if there were an invasion? Do you think they'd pull out because of sanctions, or do you think they'd just ignore them? My colleague mentioned the use of mercenaries. It is the case that the militia have been set up in Ukraine in local areas that citizens have trained in the use of weapons and everything. How concerned are you that one of these militia groups might actually do something on their own, that they're not being controlled by the military forces? And we all can think back to the start of the First World War and the single shot that caused it. The report that was mentioned yesterday on RTE radio spoke of Ukrainian citizens being equally comfortable speaking Russian or Ukrainian, and that they're quite proud of their use of the Russian language. And I just wonder, is that pride in the use of language, does it also call into question the, I suppose, commitment to the Ukraine as a state? Again, Deputy Brady mentioned, and Senator O'Reilly mentioned I suppose, the talking up of the problem between Ukraine and Russia by Western powers such as the United Kingdom and the United States. Yet your president is constantly talking things down and saying, calm this down. Have there been discussions with the United States and the UK asking them to tone down the rhetoric and see, can we find a diplomatic solution? I'm not really going to take any more of your time on that. Thank you. You made an excellent presentation and we got some wonderful answers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Crockwell. I have an apology from Senator Ardagh, and I'm going to come back to the Ambassador to deal with the issues as raised by Deputy Stanton and Senator Crockwell. Ambassador, thank you.
Regarding economic situation, of course, this situation, ongoing situation, has strong impact into our economy. And of course, Russia tries to destabilize our economic situation and financial situation. Of course, some, I would say, investments fled the country. Our government does everything to keep, for instance, stable national currency. Also, our government, yesterday, it seems to me, our government adopted a decree to finance, I would say, insurance risks for for international flights, because you know that a couple of days ago some air companies stopped their flights to Ukraine. I'd like to say that for many decades, Ukraine was a part of a large Soviet economy, which interconnected with the economy of other republics. And until the invasion, until the 2014, Russia was the main, actually, trade partner of Ukraine. And we work hard to cut remaining trade ties with Russia, which still account for 5% of the overall trade balance of Ukraine. Today, the EU is the biggest trade partner of Ukraine. Our bilateral trade accounts for almost 50 billion USAID, which is more than 30% of the overall trade balance of Ukraine. Ukraine did not buy natural gas and nuclear fuel from Russia last year in 2021. Of course, we are looking for other trade partners, and we are interested in deep trade and economic relation with the EU. What I missed? Sorry, I missed. Yesterday, Chancellor of Germany paid a visit to Ukraine, and and he discussed with our president the pipeline, Nord Stream 2 pipeline project, and as far as I understand, Germany promised to be like state of promised to guarantee the I would not the like promise to guarantee some how can I say in a better way,
consequences?
To be a guarantor state for in energy dimension, I would say in such a way. Of course, we hope, we do believe in peaceful settlement, of course, but in case of invasion, we hope that further development of the Nord Stream 2 would be in the package of tough sanctions. And what else about refugees?
EU membership.
So the EU membership, the course to the EU is supported by overwhelming majority. And by the way, such a U-turn of then Ukrainian President Yanukovych in 2013, when he refused to sign associated agreement on association with the EU, was the reason for the revolution of dignity. We do a lot to fulfill our obligation under this agreement, association agreement, and we do a lot to implement reforms. The government of Ukraine and President Zelensky fully support implementation of anti-corruption judicial reform as a crucial instrument to strengthen the rule of law in Ukraine. The process of renewing of Ukraine's judicial government bodies, the High Council of Justice is underway. We launched the Supreme Anti-Corruption Court, relaunched the National Agency on Corruption Prevention, and established the system of anti-corruption institutions. Also, last year, the important step toward ensuring transparency system of the state management with the adoption last year of the oligarchization law designed to combat oligarch influence of the country's economy and politics. So our Ukraine's aspiration, the EU aspirations are very high, and we do our homework, so-called, to meet all the EU requirements. With regard language, part of our population speak Russian, of course. We had we had common past for many years, and I'd like to say that, for instance, half of our TV are on Russian. Half of mass media in Ukraine are on Russian. We have Russian schools. We have Russian cinema. We have Russian I mean, not Russian as belongs to the Russian Federation, but Russian speaking, I mean. So it's a matter of choice to speak on Russian or to speak on Ukrainian. We haven't any problems with Russian language, but I would say that the young generation prefer to speak Ukrainian, especially after the beginning of invasion in 2014. So it's not matter of concern in our country, for sure. Many of my friends actually speak Russian, and I am Ukrainian speaking, so it's not a problem to understand each other or like to have any conflicts.
Okay, Ambassador, can I say thank you very much. We very much appreciate your presence at our meeting and the manner in which you dealt with our members' questions. I want, on behalf of members, to in particular acknowledge your stated appreciation for the support of Ireland and the Irish people. And I wish to assure you that we stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine at this time of heightened challenge. Can I note with concern what you said in your opening statement regarding a resolution or statement this morning in the Duma on the part of Russian parliamentarians, and can I say to my fellow members that it's important that we should reaffirm our support this afternoon, and that this joint committee of Foreign Affairs and Defence notes with some alarm the statement in the Russian Duma calling for the recognition of the occupation of Crimea and Donbass, and that we would reaffirm our support this afternoon for the independent territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine in a unit. Can I say that the Irish embassy in Kiev, in Ukraine, in common with the embassies of partner states, the Irish embassy in Kiev will remain open with a small number of essential staff still remaining. I want to acknowledge the work of Irish Ambassador Trace Healy in Ukraine. She is staying in her post. She's working to assist Irish citizens out of the country and to manage the affairs of the embassy. The Department of Foreign Affairs now advises against all travel to Ukraine. It further asks Irish citizens currently in Ukraine to leave immediately, and the updated travel advice is available on the website of the Department of Foreign Affairs at www.dfa.ie. So I want to acknowledge the work of our people in Kiev. I'm going to say to you, Ambassador, that we wish that all exploratory avenues will continue to take place in order to seek a diplomatic solution. We would urge all partners involved to keep talking, whether by means of the Normandy format between Ukraine and Russia and France, Germany, or indeed bilaterally between US and Russia or other partners. And we wish the people of Ukraine well at this time of heightened challenge and tension. So thank you for being with us. Deputy Brady has indicated his wish to come back in, and I'll now call him.
No, Chair, just a very brief comment there. I know whilst the Western media are ratcheting up the notion that tomorrow could well be the day of an invasion. I know your President has categorised tomorrow, February the 16th, as the day of unity, where the Ukrainian flag will fly and the national anthem will be sung by Ukrainians, just to acknowledge, tomorrow is the day of unity, and I stand with you on that day.
Thank you. And finally, Ambassador, to wish the people of Ukraine, through you, to wish them well at this time of difficulty, and for you to take a message from here that the Irish people stand in support and solidarity with the people of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.